Welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Amanda Marcotte, and my guest today is Max Rose. He is an 8-year Army veteran, a current captain in the National Guard, and running for Congress in New York's 11th District as a Democrat. He just won the Democratic primary. It is a Republican district in New York City. It is the only one, and he's trying to turn it blue. Welcome to Salon Talks, Max.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Democrats are fired up this year, which means a lot of people are running for office, and you were up against 5 primary opponents and won in a landslide. What do you credit your victory to?
I credit it to a few things. One is the organization that we built. You know, I think politics has been executed in a very wrong fashion on both sides of the aisle for quite some time. We've sliced and diced the electorate, given poll-driven messaging, tried to get out the vote with specific constituencies just a couple of days before an election. You've seen it from the sidelines. We've put all that to the sidelines. It's absolutely wrong. It's not only unethical, but it's actually highly ineffective as well. So we spent the better part of a year really investing in relationships, investing in building a coalition that I feel like this district, Staten Island and South Brooklyn, has never seen. And we presented a very universal message. I didn't say one thing in one place and another thing in another place and another thing to my donors. It was that we have been failed by our politicians for a generation now. Failed. And we have got to turn the page. We need new leadership. We need to present big and bold solutions for how we as Americans can actually solve problems again. And so what we saw is that my campaign garnered 2/3 of the vote in a 6-way race. And we didn't spend a lot of money to do it either. We didn't go on TV. We went with old school organizing. And that's something not only that we're very proud of, but that organization will move right on to the general. And we feel very confident about taking this on to a victory in November.
And it feel like, at least here in New York, it seemed like the Republican primary got more coverage.
You don't say. I didn't notice that at all.
How are you going to get your message to break through now that it's a 2-man race?
Well, despite the fact that the Republicans got so much more coverage. Everyone was talking about Dan Donovan and Michael Grimm, Dan Donovan and Michael Grimm. And despite the fact as well that $5 million or so, we'll see what it actually was, got thrown into that race. I only got 1,500 less votes than Dan Donovan. And I was in a 6-way race, and he went just against one other candidate. So despite that, it shows the strength of this campaign. But we are presenting a very clear message. And it's absolutely so significant right now. And that is that you don't have to deal with these problems anymore. Let me tell you just a little thing about my district, Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn. We've been dealing with hundreds of overdoses, more overdoses than people dying from car accidents in certain instances. And people have dealt with it. Children right now are afraid to go to school because of the fear of gun violence. And again, we just deal with it. Politicians say they'll do something and they don't. Some of the longest commuting times of anyone in America, whether they're coming from Staten Island or from South Brooklyn. You probably take the MTA yourself. Well, the R train out in Bay Ridge is horrific. In the face of all these problems, though, we can fix it. We can. People are so incredibly patriotic, but they're patriotic in an awfully nostalgic way these days, as if our best days are behind us. They don't have to be. So with that clear message, coming from someone who has spent his entire life serving this country, both abroad and here at home, I'm very confident that we'll both get the attention we deserve. But I care about the attention in the district. I care about the attention door by door by door. They don't care about all the hype. No disrespect to you or to anyone else. All the hype, all the drama, they could care less.
Well, so you actually answered another one of my questions, so we'll go on to...
Sorry,
I was going to ask you how you're going to turn the red district blue, but I think that you...
Well, no, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because we kind of whimsically classify districts as certain things, right? Yeah. It's a red district. It's not. This is a district that votes for the person and not the party. So let's run through some of the electoral history here. Went for McCain in 08, Obama in 12, Trump in 16, voted for just as many local elected Democrats as local elected Republicans, to include electing DA Mike McMahon as a district attorney of Staten Island in 2015, a low turnout race, becoming the first Democrat to win the borough in 50 years without being on the conservative line. So what we see here is this is winnable under any circumstances. You don't have to ride a blue wave. It could be a blue drizzle. It could be low turnout, high turnout, medium turnout. If you're actually truthful, if you spend the time earning the trust of voters, if you just start with policies and say, listen, we did some poll tested stuff, and I see this, this, and this that voters care about, and we'll do some nice mailers, say the right thing in speeches, but you don't invest in communities, you don't invest in building coalitions, you don't stand a chance under any circumstances. That's this district. It's not a red district. I wouldn't qualify it as that.
Well, here's hoping. So
We'll get you there.
The Democratic primary everyone is talking about this month is District 14, where newcomer Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez beat 10-term Congressman Joe Crowley. Crowley endorsed you in your primary run. So how do you feel about Alexandria's win?
I think it showed us some things that for those of us on the ground, we've known for a long time. People are so desperate for change. They're so desperate for new leadership. They're so desperate for elected officials who are present in the district, putting in the work. You know, you can't buy a handshake. You can't buy someone knowing your name and knowing the community. But beyond that, you know, look, we should certainly honor Joe Crowley's service as an elected official. And now I have every reason to believe that that district will have great leadership for the future as well.
So you are one of a growing number of Democrats who rejected corporate PAC money this election cycle. Why did you choose to go that way? Because
it's the wrong thing to do. You know, when you accept corporate PAC money, when a corporate PAC sits down with you and gives you a check, it's incredibly transactional. They do it for two reasons, I believe. One is to lower their regulations, or two is to increase their profit margin. And that's demonstrated by the fact that, let's say I never took that, right? Now, I'm running against an incumbent, so who knows, maybe there'd be some PACs. There certainly have been PACs trying to give us money. But after I'm elected, they'll line up, right?
Yeah.
They'll line up. It's not because they suddenly fell in love with me.
Yeah.
It's not because they suddenly believe in my vision, both for the district as well as for the country at large. It's because they know that at that particular moment, I have power to influence their company's regulatory landscape or profit margin, and they want to influence that. They want to buy entree to my office, and we need to be done with that type of politics. We have seen it in our past. We've seen the effect of this. This isn't just theoretical. Look at the carried interest loophole. Mm-hmm. A hedge fund manager, a private equity executive, or a real estate magnate today pays a lower tax rate than a cop, a fireman, a teacher, a sanitation worker who lives in my district and every other district in America. That's absurd.
Yeah.
Absurd. That's been propped up by both parties. I believe that's been propped up by both parties, certainly because of the role of corporate money in politics. And so I don't care how much they offer me. And I'm certainly never going to take it when I'm an elected official. Look at this tax cut that was just passed.
Yes.
$1 trillion given away to wealthy individuals and multinational corporations that do not need it. That do not need it. If you look at the top corporations in America over the last 8 years, each of them in at least 1 year paid an effective tax rate of 0. That's absurd. All while we have to deal with the commuting times that we have to deal with in my district. We have to deal with the fact that it's harder and harder to get into the middle class and stay there. Skyrocketing healthcare costs, skyrocketing education costs. People are getting pinched each and every day. I have to deal with the fact that there are medical deserts in my community. Medical deserts where people can't get the treatment for an opioid addiction. I'm tired of this.
And do you think that this anti-corporate message is a way to sort of bring in kind of a diverse group of voters that maybe weren't necessarily voting for Democrats in the past?
No, I don't think that it's artificial. Again, when you asked about corporate PACs, the first thing I said is it's the right thing to do. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for folks who are not just going to say the right thing, but who are actually going to do the right thing. And then maybe they'll give you 10 seconds. Maybe they'll give you 10 seconds to hear out your vision for the future of this country, for the future of your community. Maybe they'll even take the time out of their day when they're working, they're dealing with so many other issues, to go to the polls and vote for you because you've actually convinced them that you're willing to make hard decisions. So I don't see it necessarily as anti-business.
Yeah.
But what I mean here is that you're not going to buy me off. My number one priority, my only priority, is to work in the interests of my constituents. Not for those corporations who can give me a quick check.
So, you've been in the middle of what is turning into kind of a big issue in this campaign cycle, which is the number of Democrats running for the House in November who are saying that they are going to vote against Nancy Pelosi for leadership and put in someone else as Speaker. She was the first female House Speaker, and Thomas Mann, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, called her the, quote, strongest and most effective Speaker of modern times. So why do you want her out?
Yeah, this is nothing against Nancy Pelosi's tenure. The point that I'm making here is that the Democratic Party has lost the trust of voters. If you ran some significant Democratic policy positions, investments in infrastructure, for instance, investments in our healthcare system so that we can lower overall costs while expanding coverage. If you ran policies like that, supporting unions, doing something about rampant gun violence, in a district like mine, there'd be resounding support for them. The problem is that the Democratic Party is not trusted. Individual Democratic politicians running at the congressional level are not trusted. So I think during the process to regain voters' trust, we certainly need new leadership at the top. But we can't just stop there. To say that we're just going to stop there is insufficient, and I don't think I'd be doing your question justice. The entire party needs to change. And I think that we are seeing that in so many elections across the country. People talking about a new and bold vision, not just for the Democratic Party, but for politics in general. Why is it that we have to live with politics that are so hyper-divisive today? Why is it that we have to send elected officials on both sides of the aisle, down to Washington, D.C., who it looks like they care more about their social media presence and where they're going on cable news than they do about actually solving a problem and fixing it, not just waiting until the next cycle. How many politicians have you spoken to, and you've made a career out of this, how many politicians have you spoken to where it genuinely looks like, and you've gotten to know them, it genuinely looks like they are willing to let a problem fester until the next election so that they will have a better chance of winning? They want to wait until 2020 until some instances, so maybe we can win the White House as well. That's wrong. Both parties are doing it, and we need to fix it. And I'm committing the rest of my life to trying to fix this because I think it's actually gotten to the point, the failure of our politics has gotten to the point where it's representative of a national security threat. Right on the level of ISIS, right on the level of nuclear proliferation, right on the level of North Korea. This is a national security threat now.
Well, what do you mean by that we're in a national security threat type situation?
Well, when was the last time that we, look at our budget, right? Not just our debt crisis and the way in which that poses a long-term threat to all national security, but look at our inability over the last decade, or even more, to pass long-term budget solutions to issues. So what inevitably happens is that we are unable to move money from bucket to bucket to bucket in response to evolving national security threats. We don't see people partnering to solve problems. I don't care whether it's criminal justice reform, whether it's investments in our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is crumbling before our eyes. The first Interstate Highway Act was actually a National Defense Act. It was a National Defense Act because we needed to move soldiers throughout the country. What, today there's no national security relevance of our infrastructure, but yet we allow it to crumble year after year after year. And we allow it to crumble because we are sending people to Washington, D.C. who genuinely are putting their own careers before the future of this country and their own future of their parties ahead of the future of this country. So forgive me for being an optimist. I think if we were to whittle down the core of your question, and maybe this is where you're going, is, well, Max, why do you think it could get any better? Right?
I was more specifically asking, why you felt like the current situation was a threat to national security.
Well, I think that it's clear as day. It's clear as day that if we are not able to have to put an election beside us, if we're not able to do that and to convene around a table and talk about the major threats facing us in the 21st century, which nobody who watches news thinks that we're capable of doing that today. Nobody. Mm-hmm. look at the economic threats as well. We spoke about some national security threats, but look at the economic threats. Automation is here, and it is coming in ever greater degrees. People in in this century, young people will have 9 careers over the course of their lives. 9 careers. And still, we are rooted in an education system for the 20th century. Still, we don't have federal retraining programs for someone who loses their job to automation versus loses their job to outsourcing. Still, healthcare costs exceed inflation. And that's been the case for 30 years. That's a tax on the middle class. Everybody agrees that these are problems. So if we can't have a functioning government, if we're unable to actually respond to threats, both present and future, then I consider that a grave national security threat.
So you mentioned criminal justice, and I really kind of want to dig into this because you were saying that one of the biggest problems facing your district right now is crime, and that people are afraid of crime.
Gun violence.
Gun violence,
yes.
Yeah. And I want to ask you, because I feel like there's a lot of movement right now, especially on the liberal left, whatever you want to call it, side, that towards criminal justice reform, getting people out of jail. How do you balance the need to fight crime and gun violence with the need to, end mass incarceration?
Sure. So let's take a step back as well. As we talk about the threat of gun violence and mass shootings, these are all over the news.
Yeah.
And children are genuinely afraid in so many different communities to go to school. They're afraid they're going to get shot on the way to math class.
Yeah.
So when we are looking at gun violence prevention, it requires a federal solution. Requires it. You can't just do this at the state or local level. And so let me run through a few things that I think need to absolutely happen in regards to gun violence. The first is that an AR-15, assault weapons in general, should never be sold in this country ever again. Plain and simple. I mean, I've used this weapon in combat. I've held it in combat. And its purpose is really to kill a lot of people. But beyond that, though, because that alone doesn't solve the issue of gun violence. There's mass shootings that don't involve assault weapons. We all know that. We need universal background checks. Universal background checks in this country. So you can't buy a weapon in a secondhand sale, a gun fair, an internet sale. We need magazine capacity limits. We need to end the T-Hart Amendment. Right now, the NYPD cannot have access to gun crime trace data. The vast majority of weapons retrieved from gun crimes in New York City originate from down south and come up the Iron Pipeline. Yep. We have no way to address that. We need to start electing people who are willing to actually do something about this problem, because it's not going to go away, whether they're examples of individual handgun violence in inner city America or mass shootings using assault weapons or otherwise. This problem requires a solution. Generally, when it comes to criminal justice reform in this country, there should not be a conflict, and there is not a conflict between community policing, criminal justice reform, and being strong on public safety. In fact, quite to the contrary, if we talk about reducing the recidivism rate in this country, which now, depending on what year, is anywhere from 50% to 2/3. Nobody wants people to go back to prison and commit crimes again. So if we are talking about how to rehabilitate people, how to get them back into the community, in jobs, that not only saves us money, that not only is ethical, but it also keeps cops safer too. Going back to gun violence as well, if you look at the states that have enacted significant gun legislation, cop deaths, cop injuries from gun violence have gone down significantly. So I see no conflict between this. And I certainly think that as you analyze the landscape of issues before Congress, criminal justice reform is actually an area where there's the most potential for bipartisan legislation.
Well, I have a bunch more questions, but we are out of time, Max. Thank you for coming in. My guest today has been Max Rose. He is running as a Democrat for Congress in New York's 11th District. I thank you again for coming on.